Belize Watch. Knowledge of the past, impacting the present, building the future.
Echoes of Triumph is a publication written by Gustavo Ramirez. The book focuses on Ramirez's ancestry with a focus on his mother, well-known media personality Lydia Ramirez. We will have our conversation with Ramirez after we hear from our partners, Shell Belize Limited, the Barry, and the Belize Tourism Board.
Unique, breathtaking, diverse are just some of the words that come to mind when describing Belize. To sustain the wonder, the beauty, the rich ecosystems around us, we must protect our wildlife, our trees, our marine life, and our barrier reef for the future, for the next generation. This is our Belize. Respect it, cherish it, love it.
We are the Barry, offering you great products, good service, and of course, the lowest prices in the entire country. Visit us in Belize City, Belmopan, San Ignacio Cayo, Orange, and now in San Pedro, La Isla Bonita. The Barry. Get more, be less.
Shell V-Power with 3 times more cleaning and friction-reducing molecules. Go well. Go Shell.
It don't matter what part of the jewel they come from. You that you and me that me. But guess what? All are we the one. See what I mean?
I have the honor and privilege of speaking with Gustavo Ramirez. And Gustavo Ramirez is the son of an old, dear friend of mine. She is no longer with us, but her memory always will remain, because every now and then when conversation I have an opportunity to talk about her. You know, I'm talking about Doña Lydia Ramirez. You know, of course, Gustavo is her son. I also am familiar with her other son, Alfonso Ramirez, the late Alfonso Ramirez, who also kept his mother's legacy alive, because Doña Lydia Ramirez was a tremendous personality at Radio Belize. She was a personality. She did some of the first children program and housewife programs in Spanish on good old Radio Belize in those days, right? So it's an honor and a privilege for me to be talking with Gustavo, and Gustavo has documented his mother's and his parents' journey in a book, Echoes of Triumph, Belizean Narratives. Gustavo, let's start our conversation, and maybe we can start. I usually like to start conversations like these from the very beginning. Let's go back to the beginning, right? Let us talk about your parents, and then we bring you into the picture, right? Tell us about your parents, first and foremost.
Well, first of all, I'd like to talk about how my parents got here, especially my father. His great-great-grandfather was from Spain, went to Mexico as a priest, a friar, to missionize among the Maya. He worked with them for about 10 years, and then he missionized a young girl. So that was the beginning of my family, the Ramirez side. They had to flee, and they came all the way south from way back in Campeche all the way down to Corozal. That's where my great-grandfather was born, and my grandfather and my father, they got into the sugarcane rum business, and eventually my father met my mother in Belize City, and that's where I came along. Now, I also trace my mother's legacy, and she was born in El Cayo in 1917. It had just been declared a town. I talk about her growing up. I talk about what life was like in British Honduras, you know, the chicleros, the mahogany cutters. There were no roads and cars, so people used the river, the Macal River. You know, they used that as a source of transportation. I talk about all that and how she was growing up, how she got married the first time, and then she went to live in Hillbank with her first husband. And I talk about how Hillbank was a beautiful village. There was a logging station there, a train station. And I talk about that. Then I talk about, you know, she became a widow, moved to Belize, met my dad, and
That's a good synopsis of the book, but I like to go through because that's rich history. That's a rich Belizean history that you're painting there for me, because well, your mother really, your father came down because of the Guerra de Castas, was it because of the caste war, right? And so they ended up in Corozal because at that time, I don't know if you recall it in the book. You know, I know you gave me a copy, but I haven't read it yet. I'm looking forward to reading it though. The Guerra de Castas, the British supplied weapons to the uprising Mayans, but at the same time gave refuge to the mestizos and the Españoles that were fleeing and seeking refuge. So they gave refuge while they were supplying weapons to the. You recall that for me. Go through that for me.
well, actually, you know, a lot of the Mayas revolted because of the fact that when they were living in, especially in Yucatan area, you know, there was a lot of uprising because they were fighting against the Spaniards and they were being treated very badly. And so, in addition to fighting, they decided to flee and they kept going south until they reached Corozal. I trace my great-great-grandfather running down with his Maya wife, and they reached a place called Bacalal, which today is known as Bacalar. And from there, in the caste wars, there was, you know, a lot of fighting. And then they went to a place called Chactemal, which is
Chactemal.
right. And then from there, they were told that there was a country not too far away called British Honduras, where they would be even freer. And so they came, and that's where my great-grandfather was born, in Corozal. And then his son was born in Corozal, and he started a sugarcane farm at Louisville.
No, you painted the route quite adequately just now. You painted also in your book the road that they took to come into Belize. You know, because I've interviewed people in San Joaquin, for example, who told me that they came and they could go no farther, and they were a bit nervous because they didn't know exactly where they were. But that seemingly your folks knew where they were.
There was a page at the back of the book where I give in detail the trail that they, you know, all the places they had to go to until they reached Corozal.
That's right.
It's in the book.
Okay.
So
I'm looking forward to reading it. Echoes of Triumph, Belizean narratives.
Right.
Now, he came to Belize. Your mother, you told me, was from El Cayo. You say El Cayo, but El Cayo is today San Ignacio Santa Elena. So let us say she's from today's San Ignacio Santa Elena, original of that village. Or she originated from that village. Now, your father descended from the people that came across, like you said, from the caste war, the Mayans, and Spanish, because I think they had to have that mix. Well, that's why you were fleeing.
Correct.
That's why you were fleeing, because you were mixed, mestizo, right? And so, now, how did they meet?
well, you know, my father eventually worked his way down to Belize City.
Okay.
And my mother was born in San Ignacio in 1917. In the book, I describe growing up in San Ignacio. It was a very difficult but simple life. You know, the Macal River was the main source of life. That's where all transportation occurred. My grandfather used to come down from Macabanc and sell his fruits. You know, people used to go there and wash, bathe, get water, you know. It was a source of life. And El Cayo had just been, El San Ignacio had just been declared a town about a few years before my mother was born. I traced her life from there to her first marriage. She had married a Danish gentleman and had 4 kids, and she went to live in Hillbank. In the book, I described life in Hillbank. There was a logging station there. Her first husband was the train engineer. She had her first 4 kids there. I talk about growing up in Hillbank and Orange Walk.
That's interesting, and that's a part of our history that we need to really reconnect with, because that railroad that existed from Hillbank to Galanjog was about 35 miles of railroad, if I can recall correctly. But a lot of history was there, and Hillbank was a booming community. Describe how was it described in your book?
Well, from, like I said, most of what I have there is from memory, what my parents used to tell me a lot. Hillbank was very, very active because, you know, the trains would go in there. It was a logging station. And we're not talking fancy trains. We're talking, you know, rough trains that would deliver tons and tons of mahogany day in and day out. My mother lived there with her husband, and it was a booming village. Beautiful people, and you know, most of the men worked there. You know, the women did laundry and stuff like that. My mother lived there for about 6 years until her husband passed, and then she left and had to go to Belize City to, you know, look for a living, which is where she met my father, who had also left Corzall to come to Belize City, and that's where they met, and that's where I came from, so to speak.
No, we have reached where you came. Where you came from. No, but Ramirez family is known for Ramirez rum, right? I can remember as a young boy coming up Ramirez rum very well, you know, and I can remember even visiting, and the distillery was at the back of the home on Hydes Lane, right?
Yeah.
And looking at the rum being made and that sort of thing. But you tell me,
Well,
how the rum thing come about?
Well, actually, like I said, when my great-great-grandfather worked his way down to Corzall, and his son started Louisville, which is in the Louisville district, village in Corzall district, and he started growing sugarcane and delivering it to the sugar industries back then. I think one was called Pembroke Hall, and there's another industry. But anyhow, he started to, and then he had a surplus of sugarcane because the estate kept growing, and he decided to open a distillery to put the surplus of sugarcane, and that's how the rum business started. And then, of course, from there, my father used to get most of the rum in Belize City, and he was the wholesaler. He would sell it to a lot of the local bars, the strong, what we call the strong rum. And he was into blending, and then my brother, his son, also, you know, inherited that tradition, and the rest is history. Of course, when my brother passed 2 years ago, going on 3 years, the family secret died for, you know, distilling and blending rum. So it no longer continues.
That was a special blend, you know, and it was like a special rum, and people looked for it because of the taste. You acquired a taste for it, and so you would go for Ramirez rum, right?
That is correct. And in the book, I have pictures of the labels. I have about almost 30 pictures in the book because
I can't wait to read this book.
yeah, no, what the pictures are is everything I say in the book. There are pictures to back it up. Okay. So, you know, I even have pictures of the labels of the rum, showing pictures of the distillery from Louisville. And then, of course, that's just my dad's side. You know, the rest of the book is even longer, but it's about my mother's side. And I talk about growing up in British Honduras, because I grew up, and it was a beautiful time. I talk about, you know, when we didn't have running water. I'd have to go to the pipe, carry water in buckets every day. That's the water we used. I tell my kids about it. They don't believe it, but it's true. We never had running water, and we only had one radio station. We had no television, you know. I grew up happy. I had no problems.
So you were listening to at first, until the 60s, you were listening to BHBS, the British Honduras Broadcasting Service.
I was.
It became Radio Belize afterwards.
It became Radio Belize after the hurricane. I was telling your producer, in the early 60s after the hurricane, my mother, we encouraged her to take part in a show called Come In and Sing a Song, and that was her origins with Radio Belize, with BHBS. She won the competition, and then she started to take part in a show called Belizean Artists, and then after that, the chief broadcasting officer asked her to do Rincon Infantil and then Amas de Casa. And then her popularity just spread. She became very famous after that.
She was almost a household, well, I would say a household name in those days. Doña Lydia de Ramirez con Rincon Infantil. Doña. As a matter of fact, I can recall that she produced maybe one of the early records that was ever produced in Belize, because the records, for us to do records, we had to do the recording, send it to Jamaica or somewhere else out of Belize, and then get back the record, the vinyl record itself.
That's how she did her first record.
That's how she did her first record,
Yeah, she recorded it at the studios of Radio Belize, sent the tape to Jamaica, had the record, the 45, published, and she was one of the first ones who had a jacket, a cover jacket on her records. It wasn't just a piece of paper. And it had a picture, and I have it in the book, of kids of all races in Belize. She specifically insisted that all the children, there was black, Chinese, Spanish, mestizo, everything in the cover. And she's playing her guitar, and the kids are all looking at her. And the rest is history.
I'll tell you something. I still have my copy of that record.
Oh, good. Not very many people do, but there's a picture of the jacket in the book. The book has a lot of pictures in it, so I was happy that I kept all that stuff. So it's in the book.
And your brother Alfonso also did a good job in keeping her memory alive, because I can remember us doing several interviews. As a matter of fact, even here on Love FM, prior to him, when he was up and running, that we do interviews and talk a little bit about Doña Lydia.
Yeah, he used to call in. I remember because I used to come every year to visit him, especially when he was sick. He used to call into your show a lot, in your morning shows, and he would talk about history. He would talk about my mother, my father. He would talk about, I think when there was an anniversary of Hurricane Hattie, he talked about that. He did.
You wrote on that, as a matter of fact. He wrote a booklet on that.
He used to do specific articles for the newspapers, and he would talk about specific times that happened in his life that he thought was interesting, and he shared that with the world. And that's what I'm doing in the book. I'm sharing our history, the legacy of our parents, because to me, legacy is the good that comes of the history of your parents. Because I said in the book, we talk about history sometimes and we don't really realize that history is people.
Yeah.
And so I dwell on the people, my parents, my forebearers, and leading up to where it is today. And by the way, I'm starting a second book, picking up where this one left off.
Okay. Excellent. But this is a book that I'm looking forward to read for sure, because of who Doña Lydia is, because memories always remain. I have shared a phrase that says that the only way a person dies is when we kill them in our minds.
Exactly. Her memory is alive. It's alive because her music is alive. And, people, maybe not today, but, parents and grandparents today remember her. When I was teaching out at San Pedro, and I was also a guidance counselor there in 2010 to 12, a lot of the older people would stop me and they say, I remember when your mother was here, or, I learned to do this and bake this from your mother's show, and they remember, maybe not the young people, but the older people, they remember. And they're very proud of things they learned through her.
Yes, you would give a recipe for doing different things, because I can also remember as a young technical assistant, grade 2, in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, recording her, and recording her show, Amas de Casa and Rincon Infantil, even editing out the mistakes. In those days, if you make a mistake, you would continue, but then you'd mark on the spool tape, and then you take a razor and a splicing thing, and you splice the tape, you join it back together, and then you put a piece of tape over it, and it runs again as if. And
I describe all that in the book.
Describe that in the book.
I describe how she worked there. When she started, she was in her late 40s, and she's like I don't know what I'm doing, but she started. And she learned how to work in a studio. She was very nervous, like I am right now. But, you know,
You don't look nervous. You're doing a good job.
she went in and learned how to, you know, record and give her shows. And I must say, I was very happy with the recipe parts because we enjoyed all those. She would never give a recipe without trying it herself. And we were the recipients of all those fancy recipes.
So you ate well.
We ate well.
Doña Lydia de Ramirez. Like I said, those are people who, when you're growing up, I was just a young person. I started Radio Belize when I was 17, going to 18. So I was in my early 20s when I think I interacted the most with her. Recording her shows, and interacting with her.
1964. So she goes back a long time. And she stopped in 1974. She worked there for about 10 years.
That's right.
So
1974 was when I just had become an announcer from being a technical assistant grade 2. 1973 I became an announcer. So I was no longer doing a whole lot of recordings. But between 1968 and 1973, I recorded a lot of her shows as a technical assistant grade 2.
yeah, we, her sons, were very proud of her because back then, women did not have a large role. So when she started to get involved in her radio shows and producing her shows, we were very proud of her. Not just because she was a woman, but she was in her late 40s. She was 50 after her second or third year. She turned 50, and she developed a successful career, which is something to be proud of. She was a mother, a grandmother, and yet she kept on, trudging along.
Beside the record that she did, which we would play often, I think the flip side of the record, one side was for the signature tune for Rincon Infantil, and the other side of the record was for Amas de Casa, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the other side of the record was a song called El Indito.
Sorry, El Indito. Yeah.
And what is fascinating about that is she sang it in Spanish, but she also included some Maya phrases in it because she wanted to include all the kids, especially the kids from the northern district. And so she sang Maya phrases in it. And,
Very well. I remember trying to imitate her. I think one like, plicketing, popo, plicketing, popo. I don't know if you remember that, but I didn't know what it meant, Mi caballito se metió,
It was like, shikobing, acoustic, shikobing, pale, sheng.
Yeah. I didn't know what it meant, but I can remember trying to pronounce the words. Shikling, popos.
It is so sad because as I mentioned in the book, Yucatec Maya that my father and his grandfather before him spoke very well, I don't think exists today. I don't hear anybody in the north speaking Maya. My father spoke it fluently. I remember when he had his bar, Democratic Bar, if I may mention the name of the bar.
Democratic Bar, I used to go there.
His friends that he grew up with in Louisville used to come down, and they would go on and on and on, and I would hear them, and I'm like, what in God's name are they saying? I just heard it, When my father passed, I was so sad that I never learned it from him. I never made an effort to learn it, but, I love the Maya culture, and I would do anything to learn to speak Maya. But I guess it's a little too late now. But I'm proud of my Maya heritage, very proud.
You should be. Yeah. So, buenas tardes, chiquitines beliceños. Hoy les vengo una vez más a cantar y también a recordarles que deben estudiar y ayudar a su mamá y también a su papá. Y también quiero recordarles
que deben estudiar. Yeah. Well, one thing with
those were some good days, It takes you back to some very good days.
When she started her shows, she insisted on not just reading requests and playing songs. She wanted to make sure that she would advise the kids, talk to them, encourage them to read. And then the good thing is she used to go out to the communities for the community opening centers and play and meet the kids, bring them to Belize, train them, take them on her show, and so she became even more popular. So, and then she would sing to them, write her own songs, lyrics, and played. So, she became very popular.
That's another thing that I admired too. Well, when recording her, that we wouldn't have to worry about finding a record or so to play in her shows, if I can recall correctly. Most of the songs, she would have her guitar in the studio, and so when it's time for the music, she would just pick up her guitar and play it and sing. So it was a complete show.
Yes,
presented
and
by
then
her.
something else is, Radio Belize decided to have a library of her music. So she would record her songs, and then it would be kept in a library. So in future shows, if they needed something, they would just pull it from the library and play it. Sometimes she would play live, and other times she had pre-recorded songs, but they were her songs.
They were all her songs. Yeah, her songs are very original.
On the book, or in the book, I also gave a listing of all the songs she used to sing. The book is a wealth of information about Belizean history. So I encourage people, to pick it up and read it. It's full of that information.
And you talk about Hurricane Hattie in here too, right? Which I can remember your brother Alfonso and I doing shows here on Love FM talking about Hurricane Hattie.
Right. I was 9 years old. I had just turned 9 years old. There's a whole chapter in the book. I describe it. Before I describe the actual hurricane, I describe what life was like, especially the education system, because I was at Holy Redeemer Boys School. And I talked about the nuns that taught us. I talked about, life back then.
When we come back, Ramirez speaks of his experience during Hurricane Hattie. He also shared why he migrated to the United States of America. We will have those comments after we hear from our partners, Shell Belize Limited, the Barry, and the Belize Tourism Board.
Unique, breathtaking, diverse are just some of the words that come to mind when describing Belize. To sustain the wonder, the beauty, the rich ecosystems around us, we must protect our wildlife, our trees, our marine life, and our barrier reef for the future, for the next generation. This is our Belize. Respect it, cherish it, love it.
We are the Barry, offering you great products, good service, and of course, the lowest prices in the entire country. Visit us in Belize City, Belmopan, Sa Ignacio Cayo, Orange, and now in San Pedro, La Isla Bonita. The Barry. Get more? Feel less.
Shell V-Power with 3 times more cleaning and friction-reducing molecules. Go well. Go Shell.
It don't matter what part of the jewelry come from. You that you and me that me. But guess what? All are we the one. See what I mean?
How did you spend Hurricane Hattie? Give me your Hurricane Hattie experience as a 9-year-old. I have mine. I was here for Hurricane Hattie, but I was a little older and I was 11 years old when Hurricane Hattie struck.
Well,
Your 9-year-old experience.
there is a chapter in the book on that, but we spent it at the Jubilee Public Library, which is right across from the old fire station. And we went there because it was surrounded by bigger buildings, like
North Front Street.
the Eden Cinema, and there were buildings in front, and it was horrible because we lost the entire roof, the zincs, and then even worse, after the hurricane the following morning, we had a surge. That's when all the water came in, and we had to flee up to the second floor because the water would have drowned us. And then after that, you had curfews because people were stealing and looting. We stayed there for about 2 or 3 days until the water subsided, the mud. We went back to our home, and I have a picture of what our home looked like back then, which was, a building on stilts. It had no walls, no floorings, no roofs, but we lived in it. My father, added a little sink and roof. We lived there for 2 or 3 years until houses were available, because no houses were available at the time. And then that's when we finally moved to a house on Daly Street. That's where I grew up, pretty much. But I lived in that house, and I have a picture of it, whatever was left of it. We lived there for almost 3 years.
Remind me where the house on Daly Street is located, because I think you all had a bar downstairs at that house.
Well, yeah, it was 54 Daly Street. That's when I grew up, and I used to have to go to the pipe to backwater.
Yes.
And there was a canal on that street, and I fell in that canal a couple of times.
That's nice. Falling in the canal. I'm trying to remember if I fell into a canal. I don't think so, but that might have been quite an experience.
No, well, because then we had those big iron bars that would go over.
Bars, and you'd like to walk on them, right?
Exactly, and if you were brave enough, you would walk on them. A couple times I lost my balance.
I could sit through that.
There is an old saying, if you drink canal water, you have to come back. Yeah. So I drank canal water many times, and I'm back now.
So even though you leave Belize never leaves you. But that's exciting, Our young people would not understand the importance of those canals. They were drainage. They were not what we see today, right? They were deep. They were kept clean, and what have you. So falling in the canal would not have been something as bad as we might think of today.
Because, see, in those days, we didn't have running water. We didn't have sewage system. Everybody had a private, what do you call it, a septic tank in their yards. Yeah. And for water, people used to fill up a drum and use that water. And, those were trying times, but they were good times,
The canal was so clean because it had catfish in it, right? And so whenever cattle, right. I like you talk about the cattle in your book.
Of course, I mentioned all that in the book, and I have pictures of it. The only picture I didn't get was a picture of the pipes. I wish I had had a picture of the pipes, but I described going there, and in the summer, there was very little water, and there were long lines, and people were fighting. Because people would take, 3-4 buckets, and you're only supposed to take one. Yeah. But, I describe all that, and it was fun.
Did you make a little cart or so that, because all of us as young boys would make our carts that we would take to the standpipes, right, with the buckets in the cart.
Right. And before that, sometimes I would just carry the buckets. I'd have to carry one in each hand, Life was simple. Back then.
Talking about back, they used to call it backwater, go back the water.
Exactly. And, that was fun. We used the water, to bathe, to flush the toilet, for, wash the dishes, Then, of course, everybody had a vat, and then you would drink the water from the vat, the rainwater. But everything else was pipe water. Those were the days.
Those were the days. And the canals, like I said, was sort of almost like a sewer system as well. But it was kept clean by the amount of catfish that was in the canal. Exactly. So whenever anything drops in there, and I won't, you could use imagination here. Whenever anything drops in the canal, the catfish would be there to consume it, and so it was pretty much kept clean, like controlled. Right?
Yeah, well, because they flowed out to the sea. When there was a high tide, the canals would fill up. And it would clean them. I mean, it was a source where people would, and I mention it in the book, people would throw their, their wastes or whatever, because we didn't have public toilets, They would throw it in the canal. But, it would just go out to the sea, and the cattle were there. So, it was always clean.
One sewer system. Exactly. but those are some good days of growing up in Belize,
Yes. I would never forget them. I would never give them up. I always tell my children how fun it was. Like, we didn't have a lot of entertainment. We had the radio, and that was it. We didn't have television, computers, phones that we didn't even have landline phones. I grew up without a phone in my house. We used to write letters. I remember when I was at university, my parents used to write letters. It would take 2 weeks to get a letter. And then I'd write back in another 2 weeks, But, hey, that was in the 70s.
I was the 70s for you, man. And then you had the electricity was not constant. You know, every now and then you have blackouts. Every now and then more now than.
Yeah. Well, I also mentioned in the book, after the hurricane, we were a couple of weeks without power. So we lived by lanterns and candles for, many weeks after Hurricane Hattie. I remember that because at first we didn't even have schools because the schools were closed. That's when my father sent us to Louisville. And we stayed there for about 6 months until Belize had developed. We went to school there. In Louisville, we went to a one-room school. And, I loved it. I was with the Maya community. I stayed with my granduncle, my grandmother's father. He only spoke Maya. We lived in his thatched house, and I was 9. I loved it. I thought it was a very adventurous time,
But can you speak Maya still, or you've forgotten?
No, I only know a few phrases because I wish I had learned from my dad. But, when I was young, I just didn't make that effort. Now I regret it.
Yeah, because Maya is a very beautiful language. I mean, when you listen to someone speaking Maya, you're actually like fascinated with the words and how they come out.
Like I mentioned in the book, Maya is like Creole. We don't write it, we speak it. I know there's a Creole council now that's working on writing some Creole. And there is a Maya council too that they, in the book if you can hold the book up so they can see it. In the book, I give a glossary at the end of the book with all the Maya phrases I've used, and I translate it into English. I got it from, I must confess, from the internet. And I give credit to whoever did that. Because the book is full of Maya phrases, so that, like I said, when people read the book, they feel as if they're right there when it's happening. When my great-great-grandfather ran away from, all the way from Hesel Kachan, which was a village he worked in, all the way down to Bakhalal, and then Chaktemal, and then Korzal. So, I trace all that, and I use Maya language through the entire first book. I use, on every page, there's going to be 2 or 3 phrases of Maya. And then, of course, the second part is about my mother, and that's different. She grew up in San Ignacio. I talk about it when, when it had first started, what people lived like. It was very small. It was a very unified town. I talked about the chicleros, the mahogany woodcutters. When she got married, she moved to Hillbank, the logging station. Then when she moved to Belize, and then how she got involved in Radio Belize. And, the book just kind of traces all that. And what the purpose of the book is to celebrate. I celebrate their legacy because I tell Belizeans, all of us have something to celebrate. All of us came from somewhere. And we should, look back once in a while and say, this is where I came from, and learn some of the lessons, which is why I call the book Echoes of Triumph. They were very triumphant, and, we should celebrate some of that triumph. All of us, not just me. The book is for everybody, encouraging them to go back, celebrate the legacy of your own family, and then, use it, which is what this show is all about, isn't it? Looking back, seeing what you can get, and, putting it to use for the future. That's what the book is about, and I'm encouraging all Belizeans, look for the echoes of triumph of your own family and celebrate it. Exactly.
Now, where can I get a copy of Echoes of Triumph?
Echoes of Triumph, unfortunately, I self-published it, which means I paid to have it published. And so the publishers...
I know that way.
It's not cheap. Let me just say, it's not cheap. So the publisher has full marketing rights. They sell it online. So if you go, you could Google it, and you'd find like about a dozen or 20 different places where you could get it. I think you could get it at like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart. If you Google it, there's tons of places where you can get it online. You can get a paperback, which is a cheaper copy, or you could get the hardbound copy. But what is good is that it has about 30 pictures. And the pictures back up, all the way back to Macabank, where she originally grew. I have pictures of all that, of her grandparents in very long dresses, how people used to dress. It's all there, So, and I would encourage young people to read it and learn about our past, because there's so much to learn from it. the triumphs, all their hard work, it wasn't easy. They confronted a lot of hard work, but they triumphed. That's why we're here today. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here to them.
So we have to now, Gustavo. Let's turn a little bit right now to your personal story. We spoke a bit about it, about growing up in Belize, backing water, going through Hurricane Hattie, but you also did your school here in Belize. You went to Louisville, and so on. But what happened after all of this?
I went to Holy Redeemer. After the hurricane, I went to Louisville and I came back. I went to St. John's College, St. Michael's Sixth Form, and that was it. Back then, there was nowhere else to go after Sixth Form. So instead of graduating Sixth Form and working as a teacher or in my father's bar, I was lucky that my English teacher was a Peace Corps, and she arranged for me to go to her alma mater, which was in Wisconsin. And I went there and I got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I came back to Belize, did research on the need for vocational guidance in Belize. I think I did the first research study on that in '76, wrote a thesis, came back. I worked for 2 years and didn't get anywhere, really. And then I decided to go back to the States. I went back, got married, brought my wife to the States. My first son was born in Belize. And, after a few years, it still didn't work out because you have to live. And teachers do not make the high salary. So we went back, and I still came back. In 2010, I worked out at San Pedro. That was my second stint at San Pedro High School. And then I went back. But during the pandemic, I've always wanted to write about the legacy of my
You wrote
family.
this during the pandemic.
During the pandemic, I decided, since I couldn't go anywhere, I said, let me make use of my time. And I bought a desk, a brand new laptop. I sat down, and over the course of a year, I wrote the book.
And so here you are now. What are you doing in Belize right now? Because you're visiting, right? I understand you're going back to the U.S.
Well, I'm going back, but I'm coming back. I drank canal water, so I have to come back.
Yes.
My kids are grown, and I am planning on retiring in Belize. I am kind of checking out spots right now. And currently, I'm living in Corozal. Very, very happy about, Corozal. And I think I will settle down there
Why did
permanently.
you choose Corazon?
Well, like I said, my father's ancestors came down all the way from Mexico to settle in Corozal.
Well, would have been the first base, yes. But
So I'm pretty much repeating what they did, except I'm not going from up north. I'm going from Belize City. Well, you could say up north because I live in the States. But I'm planning on settling there. And my kids are all grown, so they won't come. They have their own families. But I'm coming back. I drank canal water.
yeah. So you actually had some baths in that canal, like you were telling me earlier on, right?
Yes, I did.
And so you can leave Belize, but Belize never leaves you. And
You have to come back. You have to come back, right?
You must come back. And what was your thesis about?
In 1976, I came back. I was very concerned because when I finished sixth form, I had no idea what was going to happen to me. And I think, young people today should not, walk on stage, get a diploma, and be happy they've graduated and then say, what do I do now? So I did a research study on the need for vocational guidance so that kids would be trained when they graduate. They knew exactly what kind of a path they wanted to follow. But when I came back, I did that study. I studied kids 6 months before they graduated, followed them 6 months after, and found out that 90% of them were not doing what they wanted to do. And that's because they had no preparation, no motivation, no guidance. And I wrote my thesis on that. I worked in 3 high schools following kids there. One was not accepted for my thesis because I didn't have enough follow-up. I think I had less than 50% of the kids because a lot of them had gone to the States or different places and they didn't want to, divulge where they were. So I couldn't study them. But anyhow, I wrote the thesis and it was published. But Belize was not ready for that. I came back with my thesis and my graduate degree and couldn't even get a job. I went to the ministry. I had been there doing a lot of research when I started the book and the thesis. And when I went there, I gave them a copy of the thesis, and the response was, "Good luck getting a job." But this was 1976, so.
Yeah, I don't think they might have been ready for those changes yet.
No, I came back in 2010, and that's when I founded the guidance counseling department at San Pedro High School. I was ecstatic because we had a guidance counseling association in Belize. I attended a lot of the workshops. I participated as every other guidance counselor. I thought it was fantastic. I worked for 2 years, and then I went home because I missed my family. My boys were pretty much graduating from high school, and I didn't want my kids to grow up, with their father being absent for so long.
How many children?
I have 2 boys. One will be 30 in 2 months, and the other one will be 28. So.
No. Going to your thesis, where you speak about the importance of knowing what you want in life, because I think that's what I gathered from what you said, to summarize what you said. Vocational guidance, right? I have always said, too, that you should really, from a child is young, see the cut of the jib, how we say it in Creole. You could see where the direction that child wants to go, and you point the child in that direction that is in him or her, and encourage the child to bring out the best of what he or her has within. And so you tailor-make the child's education to suit the child, as against trying to cram some curriculum or something that's in other words, it's like saying one size fit all, and one size unnecessarily fit all. That's the point.
Yeah, well, when I went to school in Holy Redeemer and St. John's College, it was all rote learning. You learn what they tell you to learn. And it's not like what you want. Today's education, and by the way, I had a blog, and I used to write for local newspapers online about education for many, many years. And I eventually stopped after about 3 years. But it's about encouraging young people to follow their dreams, not what I want them to do, follow their dreams. And that's what the thesis is about. Unfortunately, in Belize, we don't have what's known as a list of occupational jobs. Kids need to know, how many teachers do we have? How many teachers do we need? How many engineers do we have? How many engineers do we need? How many people work at a radio television station? How many do we need in the future? So they know what they can pursue, instead of just graduating one day and saying, okay, now what?
And another thing, too, that comes out, and it might be reflected in your book, is that we're not teaching our children enough of our history, of who our heroes are, and the formation of our country on a whole. We're not teaching that.
Well, I agree with you. And
Enough.
No, I agree with you. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of books written about it. And what I mentioned in my book is I encourage Belizeans, not just the famous Belizeans, not just like our prime minister or famous businessmen, but, everyday Belizeans, look back at your family's history, record it. Don't just pass it down from one generation to the next by mouth. Record it, write about it, put it online, whatever. There's a lot to be learned from it. And our young people, can take something from that history, anything, and use it, Think, like I think about how my parents were successful. I think about how my great-great-grandparents reached Belize and grew up and became successful. And I'm like, why can't we do that today? Look back, see how they did it, and learn. And we're in a totally different world. We're in a world of, digital world where everything is in computers. But still, we can learn. We can learn something from the past, use it in the present, push ourselves, propel ourselves into the 21st century. This is a fascinating time.
I could have said it better myself, Gustavo, because this show is about knowledge of the past, impacting the present, and shaping the future. Because if you don't know where you came from, you cannot really appreciate where you are. And if you cannot appreciate where you are, then it's difficult for you to plan effectively as to where you want to go.
that was the purpose of writing the book. In a nutshell, that was the purpose of writing the book, because in my very introduction, in my prologue, I tell people, you have to look back. You can't just think about what's happening now. You have to look back.
Look at the lessons that were learned.
Exactly, and use those lessons. It might have been a different time, but the lessons are the same. Which is why I say celebrate echoes of triumph of your parents, grandparents, and use that information and, learn about what British Honduras was. You talk to people today about British Honduras, not many people know what it is. It was the beginning of Belize. Belize only came after independence. Well, I think it was named Belize in 1974, something like that. And independence was 81. But before that,
It was British Honduras.
it was British. When I went to study in the States, my passport said British Honduras.
Yes. Yeah. Citizen of United Kingdom on colonies.
Exactly.
That's what your passport said.
Yeah. So,
British subject.
Exactly.
Citizen of United Kingdom on colonies, I imagine.
I really admire this show, because this show does exactly. I could have named my book, the same as the name of the show, because that's what it does. It looks back. It presents the information which a lot of people don't have. I tell people, look back, find out what you can find out about your family, and present it. Be proud of it. Yeah. And I'm proud of my ancestors, even though, like I said, my great-great-grandfather did not start on a good note, because he was a priest, and then, with a Maya woman, and that's where my generation started, but I'm proud of it.
Exactly. You are who you are.
Exactly, I'm proud of it. And my mother started out as a very poor person in San Ignacio. She married, she became a widow, she was even poorer, but, she struggled, she remarried, she had us, and then Radio Belize, success, there's a lot to be learned from that.
And going back to that British Honduras thing, Radio Belize was the British Honduras Broadcasting Service until the government was achieved. BHBS.
And I also talked about during the Hurricane Hattie, we didn't have a meteorological office or station. We relied on weather reports from either Miami or Jamaica, which is why when Hurricane Hattie, we didn't have a lot of pre-warning. We didn't know until in the afternoon of that day. That's when all the flags went up. And that's, as I describe it in the book, I remember when the nuns sent us home that evening and said, everybody, go home, go home, go home. There's a hurricane coming. And I'm like, what is a hurricane? I didn't even know. And then, I went home. My mom was getting ready, and we moved to the hurricane shelter, and the rest is history. And I'm still here, thankfully.
I can remember walking Albert Street, heading home after to meet Hurricane Hattie's coming, right? Because, like you rightly said, I think schools had opened, and everybody was like, "Go, get away."
What a disaster! About 75% of the city was destroyed, and we lost, I think, if I remember my research, about 300 people. It was horrible, and I was only 9, and to this day I remember it, and it was things like that, traumas like that, you don't forget.
You never forget. You can never forget something like that, and I'm happy that you have had the opportunity to record it in a book that we can pick up and read and live your experiences, the description you give of British Honduras and today's Belize, leading up to today's Belize.
It's really a history.
Fantastic.
But I write it through dramatic characters. I put a lot of drama into it. Like when my great-great-grandfather came, I wasn't by his side. I don't know. But I put drama into it and just kind of go based on, I did some research based on what my parents used to tell me, and I put it in the form of a book. So that's how we know pretty much where we came from, what British Honduras was like. It became Belize, and you don't lose interest as you read the book. It's exciting.
A little personal question here, right? Very personal,
Yeah.
right? The family was into rum making, right?
Ah,
Your father was, and your brother still continued making the. Alfonso continued making the rum. Why did you choose to leave that and go into teaching, into education?
Well, because I went abroad to study, and then when I was studying, I went to get my master's degree. I realized what had happened to me. I had nobody to lead me or guide me. So when I graduated sixth form, it was just a stroke of luck that I met the right person at the right time
You told me about that.
who sent me abroad, and that's why I wrote the thesis. I remembered what I went through, and I didn't want other Belizeans to go through it. So that's why I wrote the thesis, had it published, came back, it didn't work, went back, and I came back and forth a couple of times, and that's why I never followed the rum
The rum.
business.
Yeah.
Ramirez details his mom's activities in the community. He has made frequent visits back home, and he shares some of the changes he has seen over the years. We will have more of our conversation with Gustavo Ramirez after these words from our partners, Shell Belize Limited, the Barry, and the Belize Tourism Board.
Unique, breathtaking, diverse are just some of the words that come to mind when describing Belize. To sustain the wonder, the beauty, the rich ecosystems around us, we must protect our wildlife, our trees, our marine life, and our barrier reef for the future, for the next generation. This is our Belize. Respect it, cherish it, love it.
We are the Barry, offering you great products, good service, and of course, the lowest prices in the entire country. Visit us in Belize City, Belmopan, Sa Ignacio Cayo, Ondrak, and now in San Pedro, La Isla Bonita. The Barry. Get more? Be less.
Shell V-Power with 3 times more cleaning and friction-reducing molecules. Go well. Go Shell.
It don't matter what part of the jewel they come from. You that you and me that me. But guess what? All are we the one. See what I mean?
Now, Gustavo, you live in the United States. You're coming back to live in Belize, but in between the era, the time span that we are covering, you've been to Belize several times. So you have seen changes, whole lot since Hurricane Hattie, of course. You have seen the changes taking place in our country. Would you like to comment on some of these changes that you have seen?
Well, I think one of the words that would most likely describe it is admiration. I admire our young people. They are a million miles ahead of me when it comes to technology, digital world. I mean, I couldn't do 1/10 of what they do. And I love the fact that we have universities. When I was finishing sixth form, there were no universities. We have universities today. Our education system has advanced by leaps and bounds. We have an internet. Kids can study. They can write to somebody and in 1 second have that. When I was in college, it took 2 weeks to get a letter and 2 weeks to send another one back home. Now you can press a button and by email and communicate with someone. You can use WhatsApp and talk to them for free. I never had that growing up. And so I'm impressed. I am very impressed with, but still, I would like our young people to know that, there's more you can learn. There's much more you can learn about successes in the past to propel you into the 21st century. Because, who knows, 2, 3, 4 generations from now, they will look back and they will say, what did our grandparents do? How did they help us to reach where we are? So yeah, I admire what's going on in Belize, and I'd like to encourage our young people, keep it up, and keep pushing forward, because we may have a person that lands on the moon next from Belize. You never can tell, So I know we have scientists and stuff like that, but changes that I see, from carrying water falling into a canal to now, I think it's fabulous. And like I said, I would encourage people to learn about their history, and that would help propel them even further ahead in the 21st century. And as far as changes, it's not like when I was growing up. You don't have to back water and you don't have to fall in a canal. But still, there is a lot that you can learn from history, and that pushes us forward and encourages us. It gives us something to live for. So that's what I've seen, and that's what I admire about, Belizeans today.
Now, Gustavo, you're living in the United States and you have 2 sons, right? Do you talk to them about Belize? I know you said they have visited Belize, but what's their reaction about their country?
Well, my first son was born in Belize when we lived at San Pedro. And my second son was born right after we left Belize. And he goes around telling everybody that he's Belizean. And people look at him and they see this 6'2" white guy, and he tells everybody, I am Mayan. He loves his heritage. You go in his apartment today, you will see a flag of Belize. You will see carvings of Siricote. He loves Belizean culture. And, both my boys, I have raised them to be proud of who they are, where they came from, and so they know where they're headed. And my youngest boy, he told me, he said, Dad, I think I want to go to Belize to live because I'll live as a king in Belize, because he's vegan and he loves Belize food. So
Now, let me take you back to a little bit here to pre-independence, the road to independence, and the fact that we have independent Belize since 1981. Were you around when Belize got its independence, around those times?
Fortunately, I wasn't in Belize when it became independent. I had come back to work, like I said, after I got my thesis, and then when I realized that
You went.
I couldn't even get a job, that's when I went back in 79.
So you missed the whole 1981.
So I missed the independence celebrations and whatnot. But I was proud that our country was, no longer underdeveloped, but it became a developing country. And today, of course, it's way ahead by leaps and bounds. But we no longer have logging. We no longer have the chicle industry. All that stuff is in the past. We have, excellent tourism, and we have industries today, technology. Everything that's in Belize is great. But still, I always look back fondly on life in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up in Belize. And I'd like to give a picture of that to today's youth, to today's people, and, so they can admire it and learn something from it.
It's important because a tree, this big majestic tree that we see in the forest, and this big tree that we call Belize of today, has roots. And I think what you are alluding to is the fact that we need to know our roots, what our roots are, so we can know exactly how to take care of this beautiful tree, because we understand the roots and we could appreciate where the roots are and how they are connected.
That is quite correct. Like I said, I trace, my father's heritage, his great-great-grandfather. I trace my mother, how she grew up in San Ignacio. I explain what Belize was like. Well, British Honduras. The book ends, I think, in the 76 or something like that. My second book, I'm hoping to pick it up where that one left off and bring it up to today. It's going to be a little harder because I haven't lived in Belize very much, but, I can do the research and figure out where we are and, present it to the world. I'm very proud of Belize. So I can present it to the world, not just to Belizeans, but to the world. Because a lot of people have read my book, people in Europe, and, they learn, they're like, oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know that. And I'm like, well, now you do. And I have all the pictures to back it up.
Well, I'm sure this will bring back some pleasant memories to me because of the fact that I am connected somewhere with what you're describing. I was with Radio Belize. I spent 25 years of my life at Radio Belize, so I'm very much familiar with a lot that you might describe in here. And having been in Belize as a little boy going to Wesley College in 2A when Hurricane Hattie struck, I remember the Hurricane Hattie experiences, and I could relate directly to what you have written here. And so it's a must read for me.
Well, I sure hope you read it. And, you know, I encourage Belizeans today to read it because it has a lot of history in it. And like I said, it has a lot of pictures to back up that history. So you know it's not just something made up. It's not fiction. It's true.
Before we wrap up here our conversation, I was looking at your book. I can see a few pictures here. I am looking at this one that speaks about the original Louisville Estate Distillery blenders and bottlers and the Ambassador Lounge.
Right.
Right. That's on.
My brother's bar.
Yes. That's on Hydes Lane.
It was on Hydes Lane. It doesn't exist anymore, but that's
that's
where
on
it
Hydes
was.
Lane,
Yeah.
And then your label here, Ramirez stickers, refined white, double filtered, double stilled. J. Ramirez and Sons. JJ stands for your
My father.
Your father,
Jose Jesus.
Jose Jesus.
Right. And sons, that would be Alfonso.
Any other children? Any other siblings?
Well, I have a brother, Richard. He lives in Los Angeles. He is a pastor today. But when he lived here as a teenager, he was very active in music. He had a band, Los Echos. And they even played once at for the September celebrations. They have a Battle of the Bands. They played in that. And then eventually he went to live in the States. But he comes regularly to Belize, just like I do.
I like how you end here. In the book, you said, music was an innate part of Malil's life. You called her Malil's. Why?
Well, when she was a young girl growing up in San Ignacio, she was born in 1917, her friends would call her Lil or Lily. So in the book, throughout the book, I call her Lily when she was growing up, and then I call her Malil because she was her mother.
Yes.
And at the end of the book, I have what's known as a cast of characters where I repeat who the characters were in the book and who they were in real life. So
You end here saying her goal was to entertain, educate, and incentivize others, especially young people, to reach for the stars. She freely shared musical talents. Throughout her entire life, in good times as well as times of struggles, she built and maintained solid people relationships. That was success in life. She worked hard to entertain radio listeners, Belizean artists, co-workers, family and friends in Belize and beyond. I am proud to share her exciting legacy and celebrate echoes of her triumph at home and abroad. And then you go into some very interesting pictures here. Since I opened the book, I'm seeing her with students of Stella Maris School in Belize City in 1965. You're describing that here.
she was very active in a lot of non-profit associations. She used to go and play for the people at Stella Maris. She even taught a young girl who was blind how to play the guitar. She would love to share her talents, freely, of course.
Very good. Then I noticed she's with the Premier in several occasions, Premier George Price. For example, when she's presenting the record to the Premier, the Indito record to Premier Price in 1966, you have that very well described here. And then there's the community center opening in San Joaquin in 1967. Wow, and some of awards, singing for village children in Orange Walk. You really did justice to your mom's memory.
Well, yes, because she used to go out, the government officials, the premier would invite her because she provided free entertainment. She would play her guitar for the kids, and once she would meet the village kids, she would bring them to Belize to participate in her show. And, I celebrate her legacy because she was very giving. She didn't just have a show and keep her success to herself. She would share it. She would encourage kids to come participate in her show and make themselves famous and known and develop their talents. So she was into that, and I think that is a great legacy.
A thank you letter from Premier George Price is also there.
Yes, well, he used to thank her because she would go with him many times at the openings of village centers, in San Esteban, San Narciso, San Joaquin, and entertain freely. And he would always thank her because she did a lot of free work, volunteer work. She would go to play for the sanitarium, the Rotary Club. She was all over the place.
Yes, she certainly was. I like the note that here that in the newspaper it says Popular Radio Belize children's program organizer and broadcaster Lydia Ramirez has produced her first record, which is now being sold in Belize. Lydia's record is sung in Spanish, and she accompanies herself singing El Indito and Saludo a los Chiquitines Beliceños. The record is in a colorful jacket envelope, which shows Belizean children of all races listening to Lydia's song. Lydia's radio programs, Amas de Casa and Rincon Infantil, have become popular in Belize as well as the neighboring republics. An Indito record at present is being displayed at the Belize Times show window. So this was an article from the Belize Times.
Right, it was. It was. And she did not use any marketing. She sold all her records by herself. Most of her records were sold when she would go to these community center openings. She would take her letters, her record, and that's where she sold most of them.
And she used to appear along with another legend, Belizean legend, which was Eddie Seferino Claudino Fistulares Tobincas Tobias, hijo de Doña Rosa y don Entán de la Isla del Benqueviejo del Carmen, Eddie Seferino Claudino Fistulares Coleman.
They were just very close friends. Whenever she would give songs on Rincon Infantil, she would invite him, and he would play, in the background. I have recordings of many of those songs where one of them would be La rana y el sapo se van a casar.
I remember that.
And he would pretend to be the priest and the doves, and he would make all the sounds. And then my mother had, after she started that Rincon Infantil, she did a monthly sorteo de la adivinanza where she would give riddles, invite the kids to give their answers. She would shuffle the correct answers and invite people like Seferino, the technicians, probably you, I don't know, would go in and she would shuffle it and pull a letter, and the winner would get, a prize. And she encouraged the chief broadcasting officer. She said, instead of just giving them a toy, why don't you give them books or reading supplies? And so she was very famous with the kids in the districts because whenever they'd win, they'd get a book or they'd get some blanks or pens, and because she encouraged children. She would always say in her signature tune, she'd say, help your mother, father, study, stay in school. So that was always her goal. She pushed young people to learn and move on forward. Because she only made it to Standard 6. Because when she was growing up in San Ignacio, there were no high schools. So she finished Standard 6 and that was it. And yet she became a famous broadcaster. So I'm telling young people, look back, look at your legacy, see where your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents came from, what did they do, and then ask yourself, can I mirror that? Can I be successful? Not the way they were successful in, we're in a new century, but still, how can I be successful? How can I leave a legacy for my children and grandchildren? That's what the book is all about.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it, and I'm sure those our listeners and viewers, I would encourage to get a copy, wherever you can.
So.
Because really this for me, it's it's close to me, because I could relate to almost everything you have said, about this book, about your family and so on. I could relate to all of it. So I want to thank you so much for talking with me. Now, anything you might want to say that I did not ask you?
I think you pretty much covered it, all of it. Like I said, basically, I am very, very happy to have grown up in Belize. In the old days, I learned a lot, not just from growing up in Belize, but from my parents and grandparents. The one thing I want to do is I want to thank my parents because they would tell us over and over and over their history, the history of their parents and grandparents, which is why I wrote the book, because I knew it by heart. They just kept repeating it over and over again. And from a very early age, I knew I wanted to write a book. I just never got around to it until the beginning of COVID, and I figured I'd be locked up for I don't know how long. I thought, well, this is as good a time as ever to write a book. And unfortunately, I didn't publish it in time for my brother to read it. I must give him credit, Alfonso. He was the one who originally encouraged me to write this book. And, it was published before, I wrote it while he was alive, but then by the time I published it, he had passed. But I do give him credit in the list of acknowledgments for having been the one who propelled me to write this book.
So let's dedicate this presentation that we have just done, this discussion, to his memory, Alfonso.
I would love
Alfonso Ramirez, right? The memory of Alfonso Ramirez, right? Who was a good friend of ours.
When we were growing up, it was me, Alfonso, and my brother Richard. We would sit on the floor. My parents would, my mother would tell us about how she grew up.
Richard.
Richard is in Los Angeles. He is a pastor. And, my dad would tell us how his parents, how his great-great-grandfather was a priest with Maya, how they had to run away because he did something that he was supposed to do as a priest and started my family generation, and how they fled all the way down to, and to Chactamal and then to Corozal. And that's how my Ramirez part started. And, I go through all that, and I'm very, very happy that I can describe that and tell people this is what life was like, and, encourage them, whatever life will be like, it's what you make of it.
That's right. It's what you make of it, because it starts with you. Love of yourself, love of God. Well, God is first, right? Love of God, love of yourself, love of your country, love of family, love of friends, you name it. It's all about love. Right. But love is also a choice that we make. And whenever we make the choice to love is when we move ahead. We are propelled forward when we choose to love. So we say, Belize and beyond, thanks for choosing love. Belize Watch. Knowledge of the past, impacting the present, building the future.
Celebration time. It don't matter what part of the jewel you come from. You that you